Okay, let's talk about code tracing using methods. So this is problem 40. You always want to start tracing at the top of the main method. So sometimes the user-defined methods will appear above the main method, sometimes below. So this is where we want to start tracing. It's important for your eye to be able to see where each method starts and ends. So here's main, and then you see it's all indented, and it ends here with the closing brace. So what I would probably do is put boxes around the separate methods to keep them separate in your mind. Another really good indicator that new methods are happening is you'll see public, and then a data type, and then the name of the method, and then some inputs. That sort of pattern that means that somebody's defining a new command, a new method. All right, so we've got a modify method and we've got a pump method. It looks like the modified method takes two integers as inputs and gives one integer as an output. So what's an example of something that does that? Like maybe it would take the two inputs and it would multiply them and give us the result back. Maybe it would take two inputs and it would add them and give the result back. In this case, it looks like what this method does is it compares the two. It says, is this first input number larger than the second one? And if it's larger, it returns the opposite of the first one, otherwise the opposite of the second one. Okay, what makes this hard to think about is that's like a weirdly specific thing to do that doesn't really make intuitive sense for what purpose it would have. Why? What is this stuff? So the goal in the code tracing is it's not actually really important to understand in a human level what this stuff is about. What this problem is specifically testing for is, can you go step by step and think what will the computer do when it's running this code? And the reason why that's important, even with code that doesn't make sense to you, is because that skill is critical to debugging, even when you do know what the code is supposed to be doing. So let me illustrate. We're starting at the beginning, so I've got four variables. I've got A, B, C, and D, so I'll kind of rate them here. A is 10, B is 20, and then C and D will both be 0. Okay, so I'm done with this line. Let's run this line, which says modify AB. Okay, so remember, A is 10 and B is 20. So that's like saying modify, where the inputs are 10 and 20. So what happens when I run this line of code? The computer looks for the modify method, and that's down here. So the 10 gets assigned to X, and the 20 gets assigned to Y. So maybe I'll just write this here, 10 and 20, to kind of keep track of how those values got assigned to the variables. All right, so let's keep tracing. If X is bigger than Y, well here X is 10 and Y is 20, so this is false. So I'll jump to the else statement, and it says return negative Y. What is negative Y? Well, I know Y is 20, so negative Y must be negative 20. So that's what gets returned. Okay, what does it mean to return something? What that means is that the negative 20 gets returned back up here to where the method originally ran, and that negative 20 now gets assigned to the variable C, because negative 20 was like the output of this command, and the output is what gets assigned on the other side of the equal sign here. So C is now negative 20. Okay, so let's run it again. So here I'm going to run modify, and I see that there are two inputs. Here's what's tricky. In order to run modify, I have to know what number is this and what number is that. Just like last time. Remember I knew that A was 10 and B was 20? Well, now I know what B is. B is still 20. I can see because it hasn't changed. So I'll write 20 there. What's this first number, though? The first number is the output of the pump command. So first I've got to run the pump command. So what's A? A is 10 still. So what happens when I run pump with 10 as an input? That 10 gets copied down here. So now P is 10. So let's see. P times P, that's 10 times 10, is 100 minus 10 is 90. So that's a 10. So 90 is what gets returned by pump. So that 90 gets returned back up here. And so I know now that the output of pump is really 90. So now I'm in a position to run the modify command, because I know that this first thing, pump, returns 90, and I know that B is still equal to 20. So now I'm going to run modify with an input of 90 and 20. right, so let's do that. So 90 gets copied here, so I'll write 90 for x. 20 gets copied to b, so that's still the same. So now it says if x is larger than y. Well, now that I'm running it, x is 90, y is 20, so x is larger than y. So I'm going to return negative x, which in this case is negative 90. So negative 90 gets returned as the output of modify, and that negative 90 gets assigned to d. So now d is negative 90. And then the system.out.println statement is going to print c and then d, so it's going to print negative 20 followed by negative 90. So that's just about the hardest kind of example that you're likely to see of this. And I just want to highlight the important things to keep track of. First is that you keep track one step at a time. You can't look at the whole thing and just kind of guess correctly. It really is very deliberate, very one step at a time. The other thing to pay attention to is what are the inputs? So look at the values where you're running a command, and if they're variables, great, you can look up their value. And if they're the output of a method, then you need to run the method. But then once you know what numbers are in the inputs, those get copied to these input variables. You do whatever the method's going to do, and then pay attention to what the return is. And the return is the output that gets copied back up here and is used on whatever line it got run from. So I think those are the important things to keep track of.